the bankers were, and the financial organizations, investment organizations, were looking at the fact that the one greatest investment that you can have is food, because everybody has to have it. It's a control mechanism, very simply. But the fact is that in 1995, the move was made to allow people who didn't have any vested interest in a commodity. In other words, they didn't require them any longer to take possession of a commodity that they bought. Like, for example, if we were to buy futures corn out, September corn this year, we now, as a result of that, bankers and investment organizations are in a situation where they very simply don't have to take delivery. They don't even have to be in the business of working with that particular commodity anymore. They used to. But now anyone can buy up your food and sell it on the market, where in the 6th year of a worldwide famine, where China is literally going around buying up countries and farming them and sending the food back to China, we've got a situation where the bankers, by cutting back on the loans, by controlling the commodities market and allowing anyone to invest in commodities and buy your food and sell it to the highest bidder, which is going outside the United States, in a country where every place else in the world, the large population centers are putting restrictions on exports. The United States has no restrictions on exporting your food to other countries.
Well, that segues, that's just one. The access to financing is one of the big five you talk about. And of course, as I was listening to the radio show, talk to us a little bit about the world's largest debtor. You talk about funny money, it wipes out our food. It's obvious with 14 trillion in debt, we are the world's largest debtor, or if not, we're becoming that. And people know it. They just sense the instability in everything because of this massive debt and the cost to service it, let alone Medicare, Social Security. I'm just talking about the national debt. Talk to me a little bit about this world's largest debtor. How's that wiping out food?
Well, very simply, other countries are collecting more of our currency than we have. For example, China literally owns about 40% of our country as a result of the fact that they own more of our money than we have. And so it's cheap to them, and they can very literally come in and buy us out.
Well, we keep printing money. I know that's pretty obvious. We keep printing money. It's not tied to gold. I think it was back in the 70s you've talked about where that whole gold standard thing shift. This is the funny money part of it. And what's happening there. Talk to me a little bit about this $14 trillion debt, the funny money, the printing. Obviously, we know it's there, directly or indirectly. How's that putting us at great risk?
Well, very simply, the dollar's about to crash. Other countries are starting to say, hey, we don't want to use the dollar as a standard for buying oil.
That's the reserve currency we talk about. We set the benchmark for all currency.
That's right. And when that happens, we're going to have a situation where literally the dollar that you have in your pocket is going to be so worthless that we'll have something very similar to what happened in Germany, where a loaf of bread doubled in value every single day. Doubled in value every single day until a loaf of bread was worth billions of marks. And people had to literally bring the money in wheelbarrows, and people couldn't afford it.
So if we're one of the greatest debtors out there, and we're certainly becoming that, obviously we become more and more dependent upon food from external sources. We're going into greater debt. It's changing the entire food chain, no pun intended. We're importing great amounts of food. China is coming up and buying up our land, buying up our crops. We're giving them more dollars. Our dollars are becoming worth less, a lower value. So you always say we just we're printing money. We're impacting our reserve currency status. Hyperinflation is bound to follow. People don't think it can happen here. It can, and very most likely will. So jumping into that that's the currency side of it. What about war? I know you're passionate about our military.
I want to cover something before war. I want to go right straight to this area of the trade deficit.
You talk about anti-protectionism, our borders, all that. Well, fine, let's do that. And then we'll jump into war.
If you want to talk about indebtedness, what the UN is screaming about, and what various liberal people within our government are screaming about, is the need to offset that tremendous debt, because the debt was created by a trade deficit. we're spending more outside and giving our dollars away, and we're not selling. We're buying, but we're not selling. That's what a debtor does. He buys, but he doesn't have anything to buy with, so he goes into debt. So China has all of our money, and so what has happened just recently is they've come out and saying, well, gee whiz, we've done something about the trade deficit. We're selling now to other countries, and we're getting some of our money back, and so we're getting out of debt by selling. But guess what we're selling? We're selling our food, guys.
What you always talk about is if we were just to shut down our exports, we could feed our own people right here in this country. The rest of the world, they're closing their borders. They're shutting down their exports. They're not allowing themselves to get in that position. But we continue to export food, and there's people starving in America. It's crazy.
And it's done under the name of anti-protectionism. Protectionism is very simply take care of your own first, and then worry about the rest of the world.
But they always talk about the good news is we're reducing the trade deficit.
Mm-hmm. How are you reducing it? You're selling your food. Oh, no. They are selling. The commodities investors are selling your food to reduce the trade deficit and getting a pat on the head from the UN for doing it.
Well, so taking this food thing, corn. I know your blood pressure gets up on corn.
Oh, yeah.
Let's talk about ethanol, how it inflates food prices. You talk about that all the time, and it also wipes out food supply. Share a little passion about what the real skinny is on ethanol.
Well, you wanted to talk about war earlier, so I keep doing this to you. But let me put war in perspective. I can summarize the war situation very simply. The countries that don't like the United States or get ticked off because we're sticking our nose into somebody else's business are a lot of times the people that are controlling the oil. And if you look at gas prices going up, food prices and gas prices for the last 10 years have been almost an identical graph. They follow each other tremendously. Everybody's worried about the $5, $6, $7 a gallon gasoline, but if you look at that kind of pricing on gasoline, it's going to be reflected right in the grocery store. The only difference is when eggs go up 33 cents a dozen in your grocery store, it's not as big as an extra $1 on your gas tank because you have to pay $50 for your gas. But what's happening with the wars is that we are just aggravating the daylights out of some of these people that we expect to buy fuel from, buy oil from.
Well, war, the first thing it impacts is food. I know that. That's just common sense. But sometimes it wipes crops out. It creates issues immediately in the food chain.
Those countries that are at war are not growing their food. And the other thing is that who do you feed first? Your military or your population?
It's a given. The military has to be fed.
What's going to happen right now, there's an issue with any of the organizations that are trying to get freeze-dried because the military is taking freeze-dried off of the market and out of the availability to people to put in storable food. That's exactly why every move we've made has been with dehydrated foods. Now, get over to the ethanol issue.
Yeah.
Okay? We've got fuel problems. So they justify the mandate to take our food, corn, and grow it, and subsidize that corn for ethanol to put in the fuel tanks because we're trying to keep the price of oil down. Well, the fascinating thing is that 2 months ago, ethanol hit its high in pricing, and what that did to the fuel cost was increase the fuel cost because ethanol was going up and they were adding 10% ethanol to their fuel.
So you always talk about farmers having to switch their food-grade crops to actually growing ethanol. And it impacts the actual food-grade corn that they use for the livestock, for all of the dairy products. That whole concept impacts the whole food chain because of ethanol's impact and the mandate that's in place. It's hit an all-time high like you talked about. And so that whole concept, the other thing's interesting, I think I was reading the other day that it takes a gallon of petroleum fuel, good old gasoline, it takes a gallon of that to produce a gallon of ethanol.
It's actually a gallon and a half, by the way, but
something
that's
about
okay.
that sounds absolutely wrong. So we've talked about access to financing. We've talked about we're the world's largest debtor, how that impacts and wipes out food. We've talked about war. You've kind of finished up there with war. Obviously, oil prices are impacting the whole world. And this reserve currency that many of us are not familiar with, everything is centered around the U.S.'s reserve currency. It sets prices. We're a consumption-based energy economy, so we know oil. We feel oil in the price of gas, the price of food every day, and the anti-protectionism, the free market that you talk about. protecting our borders, exporting, importing. There's just a lot of big pieces right there that are impacting really what's going on in our greatest dependency, Steve, which is food. And we don't directly think about that all the time. So interesting enough to me, the whole process of what wipes out food in America, it's the things we know, but we don't really think about. And we know right now that war, financing, debt, ethanol, borders, importing, exporting, those are the big rocks that have caused food to be our greatest dependency and will continue to be in the future. So Steve, that's an interesting way to approach this, and you've got 3 decades worth of experience of marking and tracking that. Any final thoughts on that whole concept of what's impacting our lives, the 5 big things we just talked about?
The problem is that most all of us look at all of these situations that we have no control over, and we say, gee whiz, I can't do anything about the ethanol situations where farmers are being subsidized to raise corn, and the farmers that are raising our food are wanting for the funding to be able to plant their crops. How does that affect you as an American? Well, right now, about 49 million families are on food stamps. What most people don't realize is that a vast majority of those still are employed. That means we've got Americans that can't earn enough money to buy their food, and every single month, thousands and thousands of more families are being priced out of the food market because their incomes are staying the same, or they're losing their jobs, but their incomes are staying the same, and food is increasing in price.
So what do I pay for? Do I pay my bills? Do I pay my rent? Do I pay my utilities? Do I put gas in my car? Or do I feed my family?
And we
Tough
have families.
decision.
We have families that are unemployed, and the unemployment is running out. What's going to happen then? Well, very simply, all of these things are fearsome, and those bring it home. You can't talk about a foreign war affecting John Lunchbucket, but the fact is that John Lunchbucket goes to the grocery store, and when he no longer can afford food, what's he going to do?
So what can John Lunchbucket do? These are big topics. These are overwhelming topics.
And
but
these are all subjects that people can't do a stinking
But
thing
what can they
about.
do?
But the greatest dependency that they have is food. And that, the good news is, you have total control over your greatest dependency if you will serve it, save it, and share it with those that you love, and basically put in a supply of food that lasts for a long period of
And
time.
you've been doing that for 3 decades. You've set the bar with the Nutriversal Seal of Promise, and everything about convenience, on the go, quality, storable, 15, 25-year shelf life. It's very exciting. Steve, this has been a great opportunity. I know that every time I do this, I learn something new. I know the folks that are listening right now are going to want more, and we're going to have more of this to come, so stay tuned with
some of these delicious meals to try for yourself for free. That's a great opportunity. Let's talk about some other opportunities eFoods Global has to offer you. Do you have any food reserves in your home right now? How long could you provide food for your family if the food supply was cut off? A month? A week? 3 days? Wouldn't you feel better if you had the necessary reserves?